Hello, this is Gina.
Hi, Gina. Good morning. Sandy Hill here. How are you?
Oh, good morning, Sandy. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Happy Monday. You are live on radio.
Okay.
All right. So, I wanted to have a word with you. So, we were starting off a little bit of the conversation. We actually haven't even gone that deep into it yet about how
Uh-huh.
some of the developers, such as Frank Schilling on the BRAC, has
Mm-hmm.
erroneously blamed your department, the Department of Environment, for
Mm-hmm.
delaying his project. So
Right.
can we understand specific, because he's obviously made that statement. I know you guys have issued a response, but for the benefit
Mm-hmm.
of our listeners this morning, can you actually explain to us what has happened with his project that is the real reason for the delay?
Okay. I don't have all my facts in front of me, Sandy,
Yes.
but my recollection his particular circumstances that they submitted draft terms of reference to us, which weren't really proper draft terms of reference. We commented and went back to them and said, we need to see these things that were highlighted in the scoping report basically reflected in the draft terms of reference. So the 9 months delay was on their end between us sending some original document that they had sent to us, and which wasn't what we needed or asked for. And they sent something to us that wasn't acceptable. So they've now submitted something. They submitted draft terms of reference, a proper draft terms of reference in December. And we are now reviewing that. The EAB is reviewing that. And I think actually that today is the day that we get back to them. Actually, is the day that we gave ourselves and them as a deadline to get back to them. So that's where we're at. The deadline, the delay was not with the EAB or the DOE. It just wasn't. It
Mm-hmm.
was, as we said in our statement.
Mm-hmm. What I mean, is it often that you find that you guys are being blamed for delaying applications when they've had nothing to do with you? Do you know how often that's happening?
Well, I mean, so Frank Schilling's issue is an environmental assessment board issue and an EIA issue, which is squarely in our remit, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other delays that people seem to be getting concerned about are at the planning stage. And we have been trying to work with the planning department to try to figure out why it is that they are insisting that they first consult with us under Section 7 of the Development and Planning Act.
Mm-hmm.
Then, after getting a response from us, which from our perspective, the only reason that planning would be consulting with us under the Development and Planning Act is because they want to be aware of the environmental implications of a particular application. Well, that is the same consultation that we would provide for them under Section 41(3) of our law, which is when it's the majority of time that they consult with us, right? It is just where we're giving them our advice and our recommendations that they should take on board when they are making their decision. Because the only time that the NCC/DOE has any kind of authority to hold up or to say, we want to insist that these conditions of approval are put in on your planning approval is when we're talking about an application that has an adverse impact on a protected area
Mm-hmm.
or the critical habitat of a protected species. And as we have, I think, highlighted many times before, that is a very small percentage of the time. It's the number of applications that we see are far greater with the general recommendations, which they have to take into account, than when we can actually direct them on behalf of the NCC to take a particular action.
So
So,
let me just make sure I'm understanding what you're saying, right? So I want to clarify this. So you're
mhm,
saying that although the CPA isn't required to
yes,
send these applications to you for consultation, they're doing so anyway?
no. So what they're saying is that they first have to consult with us under Section 7 of their law.
Mm-hmm.
So they send a review under Section 7.
Mm-hmm.
We have been trying to say to them, why don't you send the application under, if you must consult with us under Section 7 of your law, then please also consult with us at the same time under Section 41(3) of our law, and in accordance with the guidance notes that we've issued that give you hints about when you should be consulting with us.
Right. Now, have you provided guidance notes in relation to Section 7?
No, because that's their law. Our law,
See.
Section 41 of our law, requires us to publish guidance notes, which we have had published since 2016. We reissued them recently to take account of the process issues that were highlighted in the judicial review, the latest judicial review, but none of the triggers for consultation were changed. They remain the same as they have been since 2016. So we had provided a map that showed all of the marine protected areas and all of the terrestrial protected areas. We have a map that shows all of the primary habitat that we might be concerned about. That is habitat that has never been cleared before. We also provided a map for those parcels that fall within 500 feet of the coastline that we might be concerned about development on land affecting the marine environment. And then they have a list of the types of projects. So ports and airports and roads and various industrial practices, et cetera, that we would want to see. So there's a location triggers and there are types of project triggers. And then there's a trigger for us, what we call a strategic trigger, which would be like the development plan, anything that they could be contemplating that could down the line have an adverse effect on the environment. So those guidance notes have been available to them in accordance with our law, because our law requires us to produce those for entities, so that, and it actually says, if an entity follows those guidance notes and they act in accordance with those guidance notes, they will be deemed to have acted in accordance with the law. The issue appears to be that the CPA appear to think that somehow these guidance notes fetter their decision making in some way. And, we just don't accept that argument. And I don't think neither did the court, because the Court of Appeal ruled that the guidance notes were guidance. They weren't law, so they don't sort of fetter anybody, but they are provided as a means of entities knowing if they are confused about when they should be consulting under Section 41, then those guidance notes help them.
Right. So if the guidance notes have been in place since 2016, right? It seems that this particular CPA, this particular board, is struggling with understanding guidance notes that have been in place for what is this now? Almost 8 years?
Yeah, I mean, but I think they're struggling because they assumed, I think, that the revised guidance notes were somehow different, and all that those revised guidance notes made very clear was actually that in relation to the consultations, the CPA, which is what the Court of Appeal decided, the CPA can consider themselves whether there is an adverse impact. And if they want to disagree with the views of the NCC on that, either by virtue of the guidance notes that we've provided or what we've said to them, then they have to provide, I think the judgment said, clear and compelling reasons, because essentially what the judgment is saying is that they are not the experts. So because they are not the experts, they have to, their standard of proof has to be higher. They've got to bring something that counteracts basically what the NCC and the DOE are saying in relation to the adverse effects.
Mm-hmm. All right.
There's been some very curious practices that have been holding up applications that we've discovered by reading CPA minutes, et cetera, and by having applicants call us, frankly.
Right.
Things such as they have brought applicants in and have taken the applicants through definitions of adverse effect under Section 2 of the law. The issue with that, well, there are a couple of issues with that. One is that that's a definition and it is not an exhaustive list of adverse effects. It says adverse effects include, and then they go through examples of what might be adverse effects. So there's that. And then there's also the fact that they are not the experts and therefore, and neither are the applicants. So sometimes the reasonings that we have seen, for example, have been very, very odd,
Wow.
and not scientifically correct. So yeah, we've had to take issue with a few times. So there's definitely a process issue that is being made very difficult by the insistence that the CPA do these sort of multi-step consultations with the NCC and the DOE, and adjourning applications then at each step. Because the fact is too, for example, let's say that they have an application that is adjacent to a protected area. If they use the guidance notes, they would automatically send the application for approval under Section 41.4, which is what the law says. When you're dealing with a protected area, they don't have to go through all of those other sections, but they are. They're insisting that they go through all of the steps. So there are times when there are faster paths to getting the advice that they're not availing themselves of, because I don't know whether it's because they're misunderstanding the process. I mean, like I said, we have met with them. Our ministry, the council, and the department met with their ministry, the CPA, and the Department of Planning on the 7th of November to try to agree on a process that would work best for applicants. And we thought we had agreed that at that time. But they have continued to engage in this multi-step process.
And of course, developers are finding that very, very frustrating. And and if they're told that this is because of DOE, the National Conservation Council, you could understand why the blame is being put on you guys, right?
Well, I mean,
you understand how they're doing it because they're frustrating people, they're frustrating the process. And then their response is, oh, this is required by law because of the National Conservation Law. That's what they're telling people. So, it's kind of unbelievable and shocking. And if you have already met with them and tried to clarify it, how do you get them to stop potentially abusing the process?
That's a really good question, Sandy. We obviously can't make them stop, and the only remedy we have is yet another JR, which we're not anxious to engage in, because the only reason we engaged in the first JR was because in our minds they had broken the law. What they did was unlawful. We had directed them not to approve something, and they did. And our direction was lawful. The court determined, and the permission was quashed. So I really don't know why there is this concerted effort. I have my private thoughts about why that might be, but there is no reasonable explanation, let's say that, for the actions being taken, in my view, by the CPA.
Couple questions coming in for you. Someone says, can you clarify who conducts the environmental impact assessment?
Okay, so I'm talking about now an EIA, which we have a project which we have screened and the council has agreed requires a formal environmental impact assessment. In that case, it is consultants who are selected by whoever the project proponent is, whether that's a government entity or a private developer. But before, what we require is that once the Environmental Assessment Board has produced what's called a scoping report, which is basically a high-level document that outlines at a higher level, at a broad level, the areas of impact that we would expect to see addressed in an EIA. Once we've done that, then we ask the applicant to submit the names of up to 3 firms with their persons and qualifications that they would be employing to do the EIA. And we basically vet them and say, yes, these 3 are all fine. You look like you have the breadth and depth of expertise that we were suggesting be required for the EIA. And then it's up to the applicant to make whatever commercial arrangements they want with the firm.
And so the Department of Environmental's role in that process is just to review who they've submitted.
We review who they submit, and then we obviously review the documents produced by the consultants in accordance with the terms of reference. So the first step would be the terms of reference. So the consultants would then provide draft terms of reference to the Environmental Assessment Board. The Environmental Assessment Board then reviews those terms of reference, and once we're happy with those, they go out for public consultation. We have a public meeting. There's a public meeting required. So the consultants and the EAB will go and hold a public meeting. People can come and say, we're concerned about this issue, or we're concerned about that issue. I don't see this in the terms of reference. We take everybody's comments on board. A final terms of reference is agreed, and then the consultants work from that. So that's basically like the recipe for the EIA, exactly what they have to do, the studies they have to undertake, etc. But in the normal course of events, and I think you and I spoke about this when you came to speak with us at DOE before. In the normal course of events, when we're just looking at projects that haven't been slated for a formal environmental impact assessment, then the environmental analysis is done by the DOE's Technical Review Committee, which I chair, but it has representatives from our Terrestrial Resources Unit, from our Marine Resources Unit, and our Environmental Management Unit. And together we arrive at consensus views on each and every application that we review for whichever entity. Most of them are for the CPA, but we do have other entities that consult with us from time to time as well.
You made mention of some meeting on November the 7th. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that's the date. I hope I got that date correct.
Okay.
But
someone just said that they noted the correlation between that and then November 14th, Wayne Panton was forced to obviously, he was forced out of the government. The government was changed. So can you give us an idea? I mean, people were obviously requesting that the guidance notes be published. Is that something that we can have for publication?
They've been on our website and on the NCC's website for a very long time. So they should be available there.
Okay. We'll see then about getting a copy of that and maybe making it more widely available.
But they were also gazetted. I mean, so, they would be in the gazettes as well, but they are on our website, Sandy. I'm 99.9% sure of that.
Right. Okay. Now, this back in 2017, there was this discussion. Then Premier Alden McLaughlin said that there were ridiculous parts of the conservation law that needed to be removed. And he put this committee together, that was their sole purpose, to review, exactly what needed to be removed. Now, that never happened. Were you a part of that committee?
Yes, I sat on that committee.
You sat in that committee. I'm just curious, how many times did that committee actually meet?
I can't answer that. It wasn't all that many, as I recall. We met a few times, and then we just stopped meeting.
And why did you just stop meeting? Who was the chair of the committee?
As I recall it, the Premier himself chaired the committee, and then it was quite a large committee. There were a few external lawyers and representatives from various groups. I think that former Premier Panton was there too. At that time, I don't think he had a formal role in government.
Exactly. Yep. He wasn't even an elected official.
No, I don't think so at that time. But obviously, because I guess he had been the minister that passed the law, he was invited to sit on the committee. I was there.
Mark Vander.
I think the chair of the NCC was there.
Yes.
Yeah, there definitely, the DART folks had a representative on the committee.
And was there any discussion at the meetings that you did have, from what you can recall, obviously it was some time ago, of exactly what these ridiculous segments or sections of the National Conservation Law were that they were trying to change?
We were asked a lot of questions. All I remember, Sandy, is that whenever somebody brought an issue forward, I would say, where does it say that in the law? Very often people couldn't find exactly where it said it in the law. And then when they could point to a place in the law where something similar may have been written, it was misunderstood because there was another part of the law that they hadn't seen that also needed to be taken into account when you were reading that particular section. So I guess in summary, the best way that I can describe it is that it seemed to me that there was a lot of misinformation about the way that the law was written and what it actually said. And then there was further misunderstanding about the correct interpretation of various sections of the law.
So it's very possible then that misinformation continues.
Oh, I think it does. I mean, everything that I've heard, it sounds very similar. In fact, Sandy, if I can be 100% honest, the same issues that are being raised now are the same issues that were being raised when we were trying to get the law passed for over 10 years. So it's the same issues, basically. And it's to do with the fact that, well, I probably am going to be going too far if I say this, so I'm not going to say what I was about to say. Sorry.
Okay.
I did.
So just a lot of misinformation, and of course, I mean, the question is, after all this time, if you were getting it wrong 10 years leading up to trying to get the law passed, then all this time now, since the law it went into effect when 2013.
Yes. It was passed in December 2013.
So now it's another 10 years and people are still just not understanding it. Is there such a thing as willful ignorance, maybe, with what's really going on here?
Yes. And I think that there's a certain amount of people who had a certain level of comfort when there was no one else sort of legally inserted into the planning process. And even that is actually isn't a true statement on my part, because when you look at some of the legislation for other entities, for example, the Department of Environmental Health or the Water Authority, there are sections in their law which basically say that the central planning, well, I know for sure the Water Authority law says that They must be sent copies of plans for water, wastewater, etc. Provisions in any kind of development. And then it says that the CPA shall adopt the recommendations. It doesn't say it shall consider them. It says they shall adopt the recommendations of the authority. So there are other laws that require the CPA to take on board what other entities are saying, but for some reason, our law seems to have really created a big problem for people. And I just think that having environmental issues having to be taken into account when you're making a decision is the basis of the sustainability sort of concept, that you take the environment on board at the same time as you're looking at socioeconomic. So as you're looking at people and you're looking at profit, you also look at the planet, essentially, to make sure that all of those implications are being taken on board at the same time and being given the same weight. That's all the legislation is trying to achieve. And to protect species and habitats that sustain our way of life here and our quality of life.
This was your response that you issued in relation to the Port Zeus project. So it said, considering the first draft terms of reference took 11 months for the Port Zeus consultants to prepare. So that was from August the 22nd through July 23rd. That has nothing to do with you guys.
No,
that's on them. That's on them.
Yeah.
And then it required revisions because it was incomplete and not at the level of detail expected for this stage. Right?
Correct.
It went on to say, we surmise that Mr. Schilling is frustrated and not having received approval of his draft terms of reference, but we can only review something once it has been submitted.
Yes.
So it took 11 months to prepare. Then it was, I guess, they tried to submit it at that point?
Well, they did submit it, but we reviewed it and said, look, we can't put this out for public consultation. It is not complete. It doesn't have the level of detail that's required in the terms of reference. So we gave them the feedback,
right?
And they then went away, and we got the revised version based on our feedback last December.
And we mean, when you say December, you mean December of 2023, just last month?
Yes, last month.
So how does he say then that you guys have been holding up the process for a year?
I'm not sure. I don't know how that gets interpreted like that.
It's just peculiar. Here's a question from Selvin. Selvin says, how can Director Gina be fair to the whole when the director was the mother of the NCC legislation? Were you the mother of the NCC legislation?
I don't know. Well, did I go out to the public and try to get the people to understand the legislation? We did public consultation. Absolutely.
That would be your job, though, right?
Yep. But the genesis of that legislation was because the country had said at the time I think it was around 1996 or 97, that we wanted to sign up to the Specially Protected Areas and Wildlife Protocol under the Cartagena Convention, which is the United Nations Convention for the wider Caribbean. And the UK at that time said, we don't think that your legislative framework is advanced enough, your conservation framework is advanced enough to take on board this protocol. But, if you work on that, then we can look at it again. So the government at the time basically charged us with drafting legislation that would allow us to comply with that protocol and other international treaties that we have been signed up to for years, many of them before the DOE was around. So like the Ramsar Convention, I think we signed that in 1976. That's to do with protecting wetlands. And there are other conventions that required us to have legislation and EIAs, for example, that sort of thing. So, yeah. And should the DOE not be the one to promulgate conservation legislation to say, look, we think the country needs this legislation, it's our job. So of course we would have been. I don't have any apologies for that, I'm afraid.
Mm-hmm. What about this narrative that what has happened with since the National Conservation Law has been in place, that you guys have slowed down development, you prevented developers from doing projects, and this has negatively impacted Cayman's economy?
Well, I would just ask people to look around you. I mean, I think the evidence, as the saying goes, the proof is in the pudding.
Mm-hmm.
Look around you. Does it look as if development has slowed down to you?
Well, I'm gonna go one step further, and I'm gonna read something that someone has supplied me from the Cayman Economic Outlook speech from then Premier Alden McLaughlin. This was March the 6th of 2020. And at that point, obviously, the National Conservation Law had been in place for a number of years. On page 6 of his speech, he went as far as boasting about the pace of development in this country. This is what he said in his speech. So he said, secondly, this is page 6, second paragraph. We knew, and just one second here, Miss Gina, I'm going to just pull this up so that my listeners can actually follow along with this, because it's important for them to see that this is, in fact, the actual speech. So he says, secondly, we knew that we had to develop and implement a strategy for sustainable economic growth that would benefit Caymanians now and position Cayman so that when the next inevitable economic slow turn arrived, we'd be able to ride it out. Fast forward 7 years, and we now have an economy that is undoubtedly the best in the region. GDP growth has averaged over 3% during the past 5 years. Unemployment is at a very low 3% overall, while Caymanians' unemployment remains below 5%. Stayover tourism has grown to over 500,000 visitors. Cruise arrivals declining from a high of 1.9 million in 2018, still ended 2019 at 1.8 million visitors. Hotel and restaurant sectors grew an average of 3.7% since 2013, while financial services business activity grew at almost 4% on average. The development sector is booming with consecutive years of over 8% growth. And there are 3 new hotel projects as well as other major commercial and housing projects under construction. In 2019, nearly 750 projects were approved, with a combined total of over $890 million. The population has increased from 56,000 in 2013 to about 68,000 in 2019, driven by the strong growth of Cayman's economy. And I mean, he goes on, but even talking about 750 planning projects for 2019 that were approved for almost $1 billion. Are you sure you're doing enough, Gina? I mean, it almost makes me think that the criticisms against you and against your department, against the National Conservation Law and the National Conservation Council are laughable if we can have that many projects. And I'm sure it has not slowed down since 2019, right? We could try to get some updated figures, but this seems laughable to me that someone would be criticizing the National Conservation Council. Now, let's talk about the raw numbers from your perspective. Less than 1% of applications you guys actually recommend an EIA for?
Yes.
I mean, I would call that negligible. What would you call that? I mean, that's ridiculous.
Well, exactly. And I mean, an EIA isn't something that we just, sort of go, yeah, let's do an EIA for that one. We really take the time to screen it to make sure that we don't have the information ourselves, that we can do the environmental assessment ourselves. We get EIAs for projects, or we recommend EIAs for projects where we feel there needs to be some kind of specialist study done, where there's expertise or that we don't have available to us, or that isn't available in the government at all, because our environmental assessment boards are made up of, not just the DOE and planning, which are statutory members, but other entities come on board depending on the project and bring their expertise with them.
Mm-hmm. Well, by my calculations, I'm no mathematician, but somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. If you got 750 projects, and let's say you do it, I know it's less than 1%, but let's just round it up to 1% for argument's sake. That's 7.5, let's say rounded up to 8 applications in 2019 that you may have recommended an EIA for.
Oh, and I don't even know if that's 2019. That's probably for a period of time up to 2019. Yeah, because I don't think we have, that percentage holds consistently for us when we look at the number of applications, that we've looked at and that we've recommended.
And can I ask your department for raw numbers? So can I say for the past 5 years in, 2019, 2020, 21, how many, give me the specific numbers, not even a percentage. How many actual applications did you request? Can I get that information from your department?
An EIA, it's actually it's on the NCC's website and the DOE's website. We have an EIA sort of page that shows you the current EIAs. So right now, I know that we're working on the road, the East-West Arterial EIA. We're almost done with the Regen EIA. We have the Shilling EIA in progress. And then there are 3 EIAs that are probably coming up. We're sort of going through, we've done screening and scoping opinions for 3 EIAs associated with the airports projects. And that's it, pretty much, in terms of EIAs, actual EIAs. And believe it or not, that's quite a lot to be, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, because they are massive projects. I mean, let's not downplay what we're talking about in terms of the, sort of size of these projects. So I do have here some numbers that have been supplied by a keen listener who works in your department. So they have the environmental impact assessment by the numbers. So we had some 3,789 Section 41 consultation processes provided between 2018 and 2023. 34 was the number of projects formally screened for an EIA by the NCC.
Right.
2, the number of commercial/residential developments that have required an EIA.
Yeah.
2, the number of industrial developments that have required an EIA. And then the number of active EIAs for government projects is only 5.
Right.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to upend the National Conservation Law, and the CPAs confused and making the process laborious because of 5 active EIAs and only 2 that were required for the commercial residential side and 2 for industrial. Is this, you got to tell me that this is really a joke here, because I'm not seeing the forest for the trees, obviously. Where is the issue?
Well, this is the problem that we have, Sandy, is that when we hear the complaints, it doesn't square with what we know to be the facts, and we try to get the facts out there. We have spoken with you previously. We provide information to anyone who asks. We do have the information up on our websites. So we are trying to communicate the information in a way to the public that's accessible.
And the person has clarified that the industrial ones are actually quarries. So that's not even,
right. Oh, that was one. There's one quarry application that we have that is in the EIA process. I forgot that one. In addition to all those things that I mentioned, that would be that one quarry was the one that I didn't mention.
It's confusing. So if someone is building a house and there's some mangroves, I think you need to clarify, the situation with mangroves, right? If I've got property that I own and there are some mangroves on that property, coastal mangroves, and I want to just go ahead and, do whatever I want to do and bulldoze those down. What is the position as it relates to CPA and the Department of Environment, the National Conservation Council? Are mangroves considered a protected species?
Yes, mangroves are on the schedule for the National Conservation Act. But we also have a mangrove conservation plan written, which is required under our law for species on the schedule. So what the mangrove conservation plan does is basically, it does a number of things, but it at its sort of the basic provision is that if you are applying to do any kind of development activity or clearing of mangroves, you either have to have planning permission to do that. So it has to have gone through as part of your planning permission, which would mean that the NCC, the DOE on behalf of the NCC has commented on the clearing and has either recommended not to clear or to retain a certain amount of the mangrove vegetation, et cetera, as part of the planning process, or you can seek a Section 20 permit from the DOE directly. If you are doing something that doesn't really require planning permission, but you want to clear mangroves for any reason. Now, the conservation plan also makes some exemptions. So if a surveyor is surveying the boundary of properties and it's wetland and they're basically making a footpath to survey the boundaries, that is exempted under our law. The work that the mosquito control unit does on their dike roads, etc. If they are just maintaining existing dike roads, that's exempted. If they're doing anything over and above that, then we encourage them to come and speak with us, and they do come from time to time to speak with us. And then last but not least is that we have appended to the conservation plan trimming guidelines for the average person. So if you have mangroves, if you live on a canal, for example, and you are fortunate enough to have some mangroves in front of your property, those trimming guidelines specify ways that you can trim your mangroves so that you can maintain your view, maintain access, etc. So as long as you trim in accordance with the guidelines, or you have planning permission or a Section 20 permit, then you're allowed to clear mangroves. Essentially, that's the legal framework for mangrove protection.
Someone's asking, are all mangroves considered equal? So, for example, are coastal mangroves and inland mangroves the same?
No, they're the same species, generally speaking. Typically, we have red mangroves that grow in the water. Black mangroves are in the sort of deeper, muddier areas, and white mangroves where the land is getting a bit higher. But in Cayman, our mangroves, actually, we have mixed stands sometimes, even right in the middle of the central mangrove wetland, you'll find a mixed stand of reds and blacks and whites, from time to time. So it's not as clear cut as red, then black, then white.
And does the law treat them any differently, or does it just say mangroves?
It just says mangroves, and buttonwood is included in that definition of mangroves because it is a wetland plant. So no, the law doesn't treat the four species any differently. They're all treated as mangroves.
So we actually have the exact projects that are currently subject to an EIA. So we've got the Cayman Islands Airport Authority. This is the expansion of the runway into the North Sound.
Correct.
And we've got some details here on where you are and then what the next step is. We have two from them, another one for the Little Cayman Airfield relocation project. And a third one, Cayman Islands Airport Authority for the Cayman Brac runway widening project. So all of them are at the pending proponent stage. And then they have individual details, which includes the proponent has received an EIA scoping opinion and must now select consultants. So you guys are waiting on them to select consultants, and then that moves the process forward from there.
Correct.
And then we have DART and the Cayman Islands government. So this is the Regen project that's in process. And so you're waiting on an EIA to be finalized for that is the next step. So there was a EAB review, and that's the EAB is the Environmental
Assessment Board.
And what is it exactly that the EAB does?
So the law allows the council to set up committees or subcommittees of the council to carry out certain functions. And the council set up the EAB, which is chaired by me as a council member, and the director of planning, who is also a council member, is a statutory member of the Environmental Assessment Board. And then what it says is that the council can appoint other members to the boards depending on the project. But our role is to manage the EIA process, review the documents, provide feedback to the consultants, go out to the public consultation meetings, take the views of the public on board, along with the consultants, all of that part. So just manage the EIA process essentially and review the documents.
Okay. And so that's kind of at an advanced stage because the next step is for the EIA to be finalized.
That's correct. I mean, we've actually gone out for public consultation on the EIA with respect to the Regen project. There is just one chapter that they have had to do some additional work on to do with the hydrology, and they are finalizing that chapter. I think they told us they would submit the report on the 16th of February. So that's the final thing that has to be done for the Regen EIA.
All right, let's see if this caller, I don't know if they're calling the program. Good morning, caller. Welcome to the program.
Morning, Sandy.
Hi, morning.
Morning. I just want to speak something to you. Where I am staying right now, I has to move from here because the people them is selling the place.
Okay, can I just pause you for one quick second? We actually just have Ms. Gina Ebanks-Petrie on air talking about the DOE. So can we wrap up with her and then we'll give you a call back?
Okay then, no problem.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, bye.
All right. Just trying to keep on topic a little bit here. So the final project is the National Roads Authority, which is the East-West Arterial to Frank Sound Road. It says status here in process, EIA to be conducted. Any idea where that is? Somebody was asking earlier. I mean, I don't know if you would know if that's a question for the NRA, but where are we with that at the moment?
With the EIA for the East-West Arterial?
Yes.
Okay, so the consultants are carrying out the work in compliance with the terms of reference. We have had a few chapters to review, which we have reviewed 1, 2. We're in the process of reviewing another one now. But the central part of I've heard lots of commentary about we didn't need an EIA. We only needed to have the hydrology report, etc. We obviously disagree with that. But even if that were the case, I just wanted to point out that, that the hydrology report, which had been commissioned by the NRA, is still not fully available. There are sort of little bits of it that are coming through to us, but the full hydrology report is still not available. So, and they would need that information without an EIA to design the road. So even the point I'm making is that even if they weren't doing an EIA, they would still not be able to complete design, for example, because they don't have that report finalized, and they need it. They need the information in that report to design the road, to tell them, like, where do you need to put culverts? Do you need to bridge this area? Because it's all about the hydrology, the water flow.
Okay, someone says, can you ask Gina to not approve a quarry unless it's designed in a way that when the excavating is done, that there are residential lots around the man-made lake and not just left as an abandoned site. So let's ask.
Can I just take that? Because
especially that bit about you not approving something.
Okay, we don't approve the quarries. We don't approve these applications. What we do is we provide advice to planning. So it is a planning matter. The fact that nothing happens around the quarry is a planning matter. It is nothing to do with us. It is, yes.
It's CPA.
It is the CPA. So we are not approving these projects. We are advising the CPA. Unless there's going to be an impact on a protected area, we can't even insist on conditions of approval. The only time that we can say you must put these conditions of approval is when there is an adverse effect on a protected area or the critical habitat of a protected species. Otherwise, we're recommending conditions of approval or recommending that something not be approved. So the only time we can direct the CPA to put a condition of approval on or to not approve something is this very narrow circumstance where there's an adverse effect on a protected area.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Gina, for taking your time out. I know your schedule is very busy. Can I make a recommendation to you and your team that maybe we do this more often? Because, I think you've clarified a lot for people, but the one thing I know is when it comes to misinformation, the more they say the misinformation, the more people believe it. So you have to counter that by saying the truth 10 times over and over again. So, we should probably talk about what needs to happen in order for you to make a regular appearance on this show and talk about different types of applications that maybe you've seen that are of interest that, because I think it's shocking and surprising that a developer like Mr. Frank Schilling could make an accusation blaming the Department of Environment for delay when his people took 11 out of the 12-month delay that he's complaining about. His people took 11 months to actually get a document in, but it's easy and convenient to throw that narrative out there. Oh, we're going to blame the Department of Environment. When we hear the facts, it's like making me scratch my head going, huh? So, perhaps instead of being reactionary to people like him, you kind of give us what applications you guys are dealing with, where they're at, where's the process, what are you guys waiting on? Just to kind of generally speaking, keep the public informed, because the person who just made the recommendation that you not approve the quarry applications is a well-informed person who's connected to developers who, you would think wouldn't say that if that wasn't within your power. So it simply demonstrates to me that a lot of people are truly confused. They just don't understand the process. They don't know, why it's taking so long, and, a lot of clarification, I think, could go into it if the communication is much more open and people have access to you.
Okay, well, let's talk about that some more offline.
Yes.
In terms of future.
How to make that happen.
Yes.
Lisa says, thank you. This was very informative. Great segment. Salvin says, can the director say if anything needs changing with the NCC? And if so, what?
With the NCC?
I think he meant the National Conservation Law, which would potentially impact the council.
Right. Well, I think that there's always more that the law could do, but we have a law that was we agreed, I guess, what the politicians were comfortable with at the time, and what the public were comfortable with at the time. And if our law was working in tandem with proper development and planning legislation and processes, I think we could achieve quite a lot. Unfortunately, that is not what is happening. We don't appear to be able to work cooperatively with the CPA on these environmental matters. It does seem very adversarial from where we sit. And I think that is a shame. But I also think that people need to understand that a lot of what happens out there that people find so egregious is because we don't have proper development and planning legislation, and we don't have a development plan that is guiding the decisions of the CPA. And that plan should capture the vision that the entire country has for where we want the Cayman Islands to be. Right. The direction that we want to take the Cayman Islands in. I mean, we don't have a development plan for Grand Cayman, and we don't have one. Well, we have an old one, a 1997 plan for Grand, and Little and Cayman Brac don't have any development plans. And large parts of the existing development and planning legislation, as outdated as it is, doesn't even apply to the sister islands. So things like coastal setbacks aren't enshrined in legislation for the sister islands. Wow. In the 21st century. Wow. I mean, it just blows my mind that people are willing to accept that. Anyways.
Yeah, I mean, we have so much that we could talk about, but thank you so much. Miss Brenda Archer says, thank you, Gina. And again, congrats. Live says, this is for the future of Cayman and our children. We must save as much as we can now. Thank you for the good information. Rough Seas says, if she wants to keep her job, she better not talk to Sandy too much, but we all appreciate the information. Johan Moxham says, we need a comprehensive national development plan for the Cayman Islands. And I'm glad he said Cayman Islands, including the sister islands, where stakeholders be prepared to compromise and find consensus. Carlos says, what happened to the CM2 Hill report that cost $3 million? What is that? I have no idea what that is. What's this?
The CH2M Hill report was...
CH2, okay.
Yeah, CH2M Hill is a consulting firm, and that report was an aggregate study that we spearheaded back in, I think it was in 2000, 2001, and it was basically to take an objective look at the provision of aggregate and fill on the island. How could we meet our needs while also protecting our environment? Part of the result of that report was the establishment of an aggregates advisory committee for the CPA, which still exists and still looks at quarry applications and reviews them with advice to the CPA. So that report was actually put to fairly good use and still is the results are still being utilized. We actually need to update some of the guidance that came out of that, because obviously things have changed significantly since 2000, almost 24 years later. So, yeah.
Okay. Very good. All right. Anthony Blair says, excellent and informative segment. Miss Merrill giving a round of applause there. All right, Miss Gina, thank you so much. We really appreciate you. I know it can't be an easy job.
Thanks, Sandy.
All right, my dear.
I hope it helps a bit. Okay, thanks.
Have a good one. All right, folks. So Miss Gina was with us for 59 minutes, almost a full hour. And that was, us just calling her. It wasn't prearranged or anything like that. So we really appreciate her taking our call this morning. Thankfully, she wasn't in the middle of a meeting or something, right? Someone says, good morning, Sandra. Glad to see you back at it. I can hear that your voice isn't 100% yet. By the way, whatever happened to Penny Bird? No updates on Penny. They said, excellent idea in reference to having the Department of Environment come on the show on a more regular basis. They said, excellent idea, Sandra. I've learned a lot from Miss Gina. So yes, there is there's a lot that's going on. And I want to be very, very clear. No one from where I sit, let me speak for myself. I can't speak for anybody else, I suppose. I am not someone who's anti-development. I'm not someone who's anti-environment. I think that there has to be a balance that has to be struck. And I've always said this. For far too long, though, in my mind, quite honestly, the balance hasn't been there, and it's worked exclusively against the environment. And so, there's a tipping point here that has to happen to try to accomplish that balance. It's interesting to me that 10 years before or during the process of the National Conservation Law, it took us over 10 years to even get it in place. And these same stories were out there being recycled by the developers. They've not come up with anything new, obviously, since the legislation has been in place. So to me, that just speaks to resistance existing, resistance to change, resistance to us even caring about the environment. But for me, maybe I should explain it this way. My concern about the environment is a selfish one, because if we don't protect the environment, how are we going to protect ourselves as a species? What are we going to have left if we're literally polluting and destroying the environment and making ourselves already considered an extremely low-lying island, right? That's, listen, as the waters rise, we're going to sink even lower. We don't have any mountains to go up into where we can send our population and build our cities up on a mountain. So what is it that we are going to do to try to offset some of the environmental impact that human beings, by and large, are creating and wreaking havoc on the earth? We have to do something. So call it selfish, that I'm saying we have to do something in order to be sustainable, to save the human race, to save what we can. But if that's what it takes, then that's what it takes. And I don't think that it's like going to be this huge, detriment to the people. Development continues despite the National Conservation Law being in place. We see the MPs bragging about tourism, bragging about development. We destroy Stingray City. We destroy all these protected zones. What do we have left for tourists to even come here? We have to admit that there's very little that allows them to come to our shores. Even the beach, we're talking about beach erosion and the mistakes that we've made in relation to that. Are we not prepared to learn? You know what I'm saying? And learning means that we should be doing better. So I do find it interesting when developers say, well, 25 years ago, we pulled up mangroves, we did whatever we want. And to me, that says that we're simply not learning. We're never going to do any better if we continue to say the things that we've done in the past that haven't been good for the environment, we will continue to do. And then we use the argument, well, Mother Nature managed to replenish itself. Well, there might come a point when you continue to wreak havoc on the environment where Mother Nature is not going to replenish itself and is